Hold on. You did it. All right, it is 2 o'clock, so we'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. Tracy, would you please perform roll call?
Mrs. Hudson.
Present.
Mrs. Davis.
Present. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today, Friday, November 1st, for our policy committee meeting. We are going to move just a few things around on our agenda. Obviously, the substance of our agenda is in section 2. And section 2.1, we have a long list of policies to review pursuant to Neola updates. And then in section 2, we have an additional discussion regarding policy 5223, release time for religious instruction. And we're just going to flip that order. Suspecting that those who are here in the audience today are interested in the latter, but obviously feel free to stay for our entire discussion. We put policy 5223 back on our committee agenda today, specifically to discuss one particular sentence to make sure that we are all aligned on what our options are when we discuss this more substantively at our board meeting on November 13th, yes. And that specifically is a sentence that we have in our policy that states, no solicitation for attendance at religious instruction shall be permitted on district premises. No staff member shall encourage or discourage participation in any religious instructional program. And it's really the first part of that, the sentence related to no solicitation for attendance at religious instruction shall be permitted on district premises. It's my understanding that pursuant to advice of counsel, we need to be, well, first of all, we have never restricted, so that's, we'll just put that out there. But pursuant to advice of counsel, what we would want to do, if we do want to enforce that, would be likely to change how we permit attendance of organizations at open houses, and that we would only permit district organizations and not outside organizations. Is that correct, Dr. Bowers?
Yeah, that's correct. So, so I guess my recommendation would be that we strike that line, right? So the line that says no solicitation for attendance of religious instruction, then we just take that out. I think we can table a decision. I don't know if it has to be a policy decision on whether we allow outside organizations at things like open houses or not. That could be a decision that we make as we get into those into the future. Currently, we do allow some other outside organizations. So obviously law is if you allow some outside organizations, you would allow all outside organizations, but the law says if you don't allow any outside organizations, you don't have to allow any outside organizations.
Right.
But I don't know if we need policy on that. I think we can make an administrative decision. Like currently, we have felt strongly that we want to continue to allow outside groups. We decide as a group we don't want to, but I don't know that we need to think about that from a policy standpoint today. I think my recommendation today would be we just strike that line. We bring that forward to the full board with our policy updates, and that way our policy is in line with what we feel like it should be.
And I don't have any problem with that. We're planning on discussing the policy holistically. So I think I support your recommendation, and I would just modify that such that if we maintain the policy, that line is struck. And if we obviously choose to rescind the policy, then it's a moot point.
That makes sense.
Okay. Are you comfortable with that? Okay. Okay. So that concludes our discussion on policy 5223, and we will pick it up as a full board at our November 13th meeting. And that brings us to our long list of policies that we are reviewing today as a result of our Neola update and changes in question. Yes. Yeah, we do typically, and I don't know why that's not on here. You're right. So thank you. I'm gonna make a motion to approve the agenda. And then we've never had it on there? Really? Okay, well, then I'm not gonna worry about it, because really it's only the two of us. So, very good, okay. All right, so that brings us to our first, policy update, which relates to 167.2, I believe is our first one. Yes, bylaw, excuse me, yes. You're good, take your time, please, you've got a lot there. Yeah, there was a lot in that precursor,
Yes.
the summary.
Oh,
I actually may have gone too far. Yeah, I did go too far. Yeah, you're exactly where we need to be. The revised bylaw, volume 43, number 1, the section definitions. Jeff, thanks for joining us today.
Sure, glad to be here.
Anything that you want to share regarding the proposed changes to the definition section?
It was just revised to update the definition of personal communication devices, the role of the president and the vice president and the treasurer. But the main focus here was to update the definition for personal communication devices.
Okay, I do see though we need to make a choice under the definition of parent that reflects the rights of a grandparent who may be granted authority over a student.
Tracy, was that decision made previously? Is that in your current active policy?
It is not. Grandparents are not referenced in our current active policy. Correct, Tracy?
yeah, I don't believe so.
Yeah, I'll pull it up here just to make sure, but I don't believe they are.
Our parent is referenced in this under parent.
It's a combined.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, Kelly is right. We don't have a separate section on grandparents. That is accurate, but we do have just under parent, a section that indicates we already have the although and likewise, the A and B.
You do.
Yes.
So we would want to mirror that choice.
We have the second.
The second option for each one, right? Yep, okay. So Tracy, on page 2 at the bottom and page 5, then we're taking the second option under option 1 and the second option under option 2. And then I know that we do not have, I wanted to call out, as you did, Tracy, on the versions that you gave us, we do not have that definition section for social media. And I feel like that's because we potentially defined it in a policy related directly to social media. But do you recall?
Nikki, I was looking at your active policies before the meeting, and it looks like you never adopted the social media policy. So maybe that's why
we didn't. Yeah, that's exactly why. I didn't know if it was because it was in that section or, okay, no, that makes sense. Okay,
Yeah.
So we'll just continue to leave that out, correct?
No, I mean, we need to define it.
We don't need to define it because we don't have a separate section on social media. I do think that what we can table, Kelly, for another policy committee meeting is to revisit whether or not we would want to revisit that particular policy. And then we would make both of those changes at the same time. Does that make sense? Okay. I think that concludes the definition section. So we all aligned on that. And section bylaw, excuse me, 142.1 related to the oath. Most of this is making it gender neutral. There's a few little other changes, but then my recommendation would be that we do not include the optional language related to the fact that the oath is to be performed by the treasurer or a member of the board, because you yourself have utilized the fact that you wanted, excuse me, someone else who is special to you in your life to perform that oath. And I would imagine we should be able to keep that if we're all aligned on that. Yes, you're right. Okay,
So we'll just reject that option then.
correct.
Yeah.
Reject, he said. Yeah. That brings us to bylaw 151, organizational meetings.
So Neola revised to clarify when and how the organizational meeting is to be held. You can see that there is a choice to be made in there as who shall serve as presiding officer until the election.
I will tell you, typically, we would check the board president box because the president then swears in vice president. My mind would look at this.
I think that's our standard practice. I don't have any problem.
President takes over the meeting once they're sworn in.
Okay. I mean,
Yeah. Okay, that brings us to bylaw 152, officers.
It was revised to align provisions addressing the election of officers. It deletes the secretary's role because most boards don't have a secretary role on the Board of Education. And language about what happens if there's not a majority vote on the first nomination, and that Robert's Rules of Order kicks in at that point.
Okay,
I don't think we had a secretary portion in this policy.
I agree with you. I think we just took it out anyway.
I think my only concern there, I'm concerned, but it indicates that we shall have a committee chairperson.
We don't have that. Yeah.
See,
C. I am aligned with that. We'll take all recommended changes with the exception of C. So that brings us to 155 on committees.
And I think it simply corrects the cross references on this particular
Okay.
bylaw.
You say everything else is what we currently have, and we have checked. Thank you, Tracy, for doing that. That makes it easier. So obviously, I have no problem with a corrected cross-reference.
And the same would be true on 0163.
Okay. No issues there.
And 0164 as well. I don't know what your current policy says about noticing meetings, but most districts now are posting annually on the district website and in the district office. Is that your practice?
Our practice is the website. To my knowledge, we do not post in the district office. Is that accurate? Okay, so are you comfortable striking that district office language? I am as well.
I mean, if someone came to the WEC and
We give them.
posted a website, we would be able to.
Yes, okay, good. And then there's a large portion there that you've noted, Tracy, ours does not go beyond B. Correct?
Right, yes.
Okay. And I feel like our policy and procedure has been smooth and plenty of advance notice. I'm comfortable with
Well,
remaining.
one question I have is reason strike out of making accommodations to a person with a disability that wants to attend the meeting.
I think that, so I wasn't here when we, previously, at least to my knowledge, I don't recall previously being part of that discussion. My assumption is it's not necessary, mainly because we are ADA compliant and, we make it accessible online as well. So what disability?
I guess I just don't want to limit it. There's something that I'm not doing, we're not doing it before. I was just wondering the reason why it was.
Yeah, I don't know. That's a history that I don't know. There's no, to my knowledge, there's no harm in including it, given that we make accommodations now.
How I'm reading it is that this is what's already in our policy, correct?
Yeah, I can do the same.
Okay, so it's not in there.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so never mind. I thought it was something that we have in there.
Oh, no, I read that as something that was in Neola's recommendations, but we do not currently have. Is that accurate?
Yes, we struck it.
Okay.
So in our current format, because we live stream, we don't move board meetings. Historically, there was a time where we would move board meetings. You might have a board meeting in an elementary school gym, that really stopped with the advent of live stream because we don't have, we want a good live stream, we need to stay where we are.
Mhm.
But if there was a board in the future that ever wanted to move meetings to other places, it may, depending on where you wanted to move a meeting to, accessibility may be more of an issue. So today it's not, right? Today, I don't believe it is. If you want, the way we're thinking about our board meetings, not an issue, or shouldn't be an issue for most people. But if a future board wants to move a meeting somewhere.
I'm also even just thinking about front door being closed at the WAC, and there was a period of time when people had to walk to the side. And what if that's an issue for someone? I don't know every list, and I don't think it can hurt to have it in there to make accommodations if necessary.
I don't disagree with you. In that example, I'm not sure how we would accommodate it. Can't get in the front door. Well, what we can't do, because we live stream, someone can watch a live stream, we wouldn't Zoom somebody in. That we wouldn't see that as a reasonable accommodation, not having Zoom as a way to attend a board meeting.
You just used a word that my lawyer brain immediately thought of there. Oh, it does say reasonable accommodation. Okay. Because that's the key, right?
Yeah. But I don't think there's harm in the language.
I don't think there's harm in the language either.
I think.
So I would say, I would assume that's upon request to communications, who would you put in there?
Yeah, technically probably the treasurer's office, and it flows to communications, but technically almost everything board meeting related goes.
Well,
Notice wise,
I think
yeah.
what this says is our meeting notice has to contain that statement. So I've got to put in, when Tracy, we send a meeting notice of it, how we have to now include
It
it
is.
every time.
Yeah, but we have to also decide who they
Yeah.
notify.
So anybody that having that, that's all the big though.
Well, I know you are, but it probably is best that if it, Jen's. the one
Notice is
sending it
coming out,
it
yeah. Yeah,
You're right, technically it's gonna flow other places.
That's fine.
okay, so we would say upon request to the treasurer.
Someone needs to sign language in church.
No, that's a great call. Okay,
I do think we should consider adding F. So when I read F,
Mhm.
and Jeff, maybe this is a question for you. So in the old days, we used to post meeting notices in the newspaper. That was the reasonable method. And then with the advent of technology, we post them on the web. That's our practice. I think what including F does is solidify in case somebody challenges that the board agrees that posting it to the website is a reasonable method. So I think we ought to add in F.
I would agree with that. You know, it's interesting. A lot of the districts I deal with don't even have newspapers anymore.
Okay, I support that. So we are not including under A in the district office. We are including the notice language and inserting treasurer. And we are also adopting F, which will actually be our C. Okay. That brings us to bylaw 165. Regular meetings. Well, ours is entitled regular meetings. We don't have a 165. We just have, it's a new, thank you. Okay, yeah.
Nikki, this is a new bylaw, and what Neola is doing here is they're consolidating the regular meeting and the special meetings into one bylaw and asking boards to rescind 0165.1
Yeah.
1.2.
Okay,
There's also a section you could see at the bottom on emergency meetings. Should that arise, you would have that, even though there's no provision in the law for emergency meetings. If there was some kind of a disaster and you didn't have time to post a meeting for 2 days, you have the authority under that policy to do so.
I actually like having something in there that addresses emergency meetings because we have to call them historically. And if I put myself in the shoes of a community member, it's always nice to go and see, like, how does this happen? Why is it happening? What are the rules around it?
I didn't have any issues.
I don't have any issues with it either. Either one of you have concerns? I think we're good then, and then obviously we would be aligned on the rescinding 165.1 and 165.2.
My only question is, there's a 165.3. What happens to that, Jeff?
What is that? I'm only seeing what's here in front of me.
Ours is recess adjournment, and it says the board may adjourn or recess at any time. The recessed or adjourned meeting when reconvened shall take up its agenda at the point where the motion to adjourn or recess was acted upon. Due to state public meeting notice requirements, notice of a new meeting is required where a meeting is ended by adjournment.
Yeah, that particular bylaw stays in place.
Does it become then 165.1?
It wasn't addressing this update, so that's a good question.
I think we can make that
It's going to stay at 0165.
Yeah, it's our policy, so I fully support that.
Since this one is becoming 165.
Yeah, no, that's a good catch, Kelly. So let's make 165.3 now 165.1, and we'll make sure our peers know it's just a number and change. That brings us to 166, which is now agendas.
So previously, that was your executive session bylaw. We're going to move the executive session bylaw to 0167.2, and we're going to replace 0166 with agendas.
Okay.
So it addresses your board agendas and consent agendas. Do you use a consent agenda?
We do.
Yeah.
And I think that to be consistent with other portions, well, actually, let me just look at agenda. Would it be 2 days? That's what we currently see is 3.
So it's under 165.1.
Okay.
So we would put 3 in there, Tracy.
And then just looking at our prior agenda to see if there's anything to be added into under consent agenda. Except other.
We have catch all any other item with DOE approval.
So I assume you would want that in, what is gonna go in, under consent agenda, section F.
Did you say that's
So if you look on 165.1 now, it says minutes, bills, hiring, resolutions that require annual adoption, resignations and leaves. That says technical corrections and any other item with DOE approval. In reality, we don't necessarily use the consent agenda other than personnel.
Right.
But if a board ever wanted to, some districts do.
I think that makes sense to keep it done. You comfortable with that? Okay. And that brings us to 167.2 executive session. Looks like.
So, yeah, they're moving a lot of things around here, but this bylaw used to address personal communication devices, and that was switched to 10167.7. But this is your executive session bylaw then.
Okay, and I noticed we've got just removal of pronouns, or we changing to gender neutral, which is great, and everything else is the same one. You
So
read
this
that
is-
as well?
This is under, so 167 right now is voting.
I think it was 166 before. Am I reading that
Is that what it
correctly?
is? Okay. I'm trying to. 160.
Yeah, 166 before, yeah.
Yes, I'm still trying to, maybe I'm missing something. Hold on, if I'm missing a step, I apologize. 167, so this is 167.2, this is 167.7, then what is
167 now is, so we might not have gotten to it because they're moving so much around. Is that not changing?
that part?
Is it keeping?
Yeah, that did not change.
Okay, so is
I think maybe what a little bit of the confusion might be is they changed the number on the executive session, which used to be the use of personal communication devices. You did not have that bylaw, and
Oh, there we go.
Neola is moving that to 0167.7.
But we're still on executive session, correct?
Yes.
Yes, and so 167.2, I actually think should be 167.1 because we do not have a 167.1.
167 is voting, and I guess, is that the appropriate place to put executive session?
I don't feel like it is.
So
It
Jeff, are you
was a
saying,
standalone before.
Jeff, are you saying that Neola's like template for bylaw 167 has to do with personal communication device? And so I'm thinking that then our 167 is different because we did not have that.
Let's see, my notes indicate that use of personal communication devices was 0167.2.
We do not have that.
Right.
But I agree with you, Kelly. So 166 is now agendas. Executive session, we previously had as its own section, not as a subset. It doesn't make sense for it to be a subset of voting. So I think that once all the changes are made, this just goes up to its own section like it currently is. And I don't know what that is right now because we have so many moving parts. It may end up being 169. I don't know what it ends up being, but it needs to be its own section. It doesn't make sense for it to be a subset.
No, correct.
Okay. So Tracy, we want it equivalent to a 166, 167, 168, 169, like, but it just shouldn't be a subset of voting. It shouldn't be a 167.1. We're not quite sure because there's so many moving parts here, what makes sense from a numbering standpoint, but as long as it's kind of slotted in there as one of the main bylaws, I think we're comfortable, yes?
Yes.
Okay.
Because, and then my question would be, like, then you're saying, 169. We're throwing numbers out there, but like, I wonder if then we put it at the end,
170.
because do we then have to vote to change all these numbers?
Yeah.
And not that that would be a huge deal, but.
No, but you're totally right. We don't need to make this more complicated on ourselves. So I support 170 unless there's another number, once all these changes are made, that makes better sense, makes more sense.
Unless you put executive session under agenda and make it 166.1. Executive session under agenda makes sense to
It
me.
does make sense to me. It's part of the agenda.
So just food for thought, when Neola revises these again, your numbers will be different. So it will be important to make sure that those are picked up correctly.
Okay, why don't we pause on this portion to understand what we have, what Neola's numbers are, what our numbers are, and kind of compare?
I'm comfortable with that. I don't feel like we need to have a numbering recommendation. We take it to the board. I think that we can look at that after the fact and make that recommendation when we have the board discussion. Okay. Good. Once we see where everything lands.
Because then I don't want things to get all out of sorts as we continue to get updates.
Okay. So no substantive changes then to the executive session change.
I do think you may want, this just dawned on me, where it says an executive session will be held only at regular or special meeting. So we may want to add emergency meeting to that, especially if it's a disaster and a security issue.
That's a good call out.
Emergency.
Where is that?
The second to the last paragraph, where it says an executive session will be held only at regular or special meeting. You see that? It would say regular, special, or emergency meeting.
I think that's an excellent point.
Okay. So that brings us to use of personal communication devices, and as stated, we actually do not have that policy.
It appears that you do not currently have that policy or that bylaw for the board. Is that something that you would want to have?
My question for, I think this one, and there were a couple of others that included cell phone uses or communication devices. Is that part of the cell phone policy conversation? So that flows, it says across the board of policies and what we're doing.
Interesting question. Is there a reason that board members would need to have a PC? Board members need to be included in personal communication devices that need to be.
I think this is where it gets complicated. I think personal communication device, it doesn't mean that it's only what the district provides. It's the people who's around. It's the people who's for district. That's where I think we gotta get Jeff to weigh in and kind of review this internally.
I wholeheartedly agree. Yes.
All right, so why don't we table
Table.
PC devices? Yeah.
Is that correct, Jeff? I mean, the way they're defining personal communication device is not just if the board
Yeah.
pays for that.
No, that's exactly right.
That's correct.
And I mean, that would include us as well. Yeah, the district paid, so.
Okay, so bylaw 167.7 is tabled. Waiting feedback from Jeff. And 173 is rescinded because it's addressed
In
elsewhere.
0152, correct.
Okay. All right, that brings us to policy 4120.08, employment of personnel for co-curricular, extracurricular activities, and we do not currently have. And the Neola change is enrollment in state RAP Act system.
Or classified or support staff, that's correct.
And
Don't, our classified support staff don't. Course.
that's why we don't have it.
Well, I don't know why, I'm not, it's fascinating, I'm not sure what the history is. Jeff, if we
Yes.
employ individuals from the community, so they're not employed with us for any other reason, but they coach for us, or is RAPBAC, do they need to be enrolled in RAPBAC as well?
That's a good question. So this is employment of personnel for co-curricular, extracurricular activities among your classified or support staff.
And that's because the RAP Act system relates to people who are licensed.
Also referred in this next policy, 4121, for the history check, and it only talks about employees and contractors. I don't know if that answers your question.
So do you have classified staff that serve as co-curricular or extracurricular activity?
We don't, Jeff, no.
Okay, that's probably why you don't have the policy.
Okay. Because it's the personnel part of it, that's the key there. Okay.
But did you say anything answers that question, like that's aside?
I'll check it out to you. I'll go. So RAPBAC has been in place for a long time. Teachers and administrators, now all of our support staff members have to enroll in the RAPBAC system. It's a massive transition, it's probably good long term, but they have to physically fit themselves versus it used to be that there was like an upload. So our teachers were in the RAPBAC system, but they didn't have to go in and do the RAPBAC system. So Christy DeWeese is working with every support staff member to help them enroll themselves in RAPBAC. As you can imagine, asking employees to do something themselves is a whole lot harder than just having an upload system to the state of Ohio.
100%.
So this part, this enrollment state RAPBAC system is, the reason we're doing it is because the law has added that to which again, I think is great. I'll just say editorially, they've done it the same thing with teachers. It's been a whole lot easier than asking each employee to do it themselves. It's just tracking employees down constantly. Yeah, but that's got nothing to do with policy.
If we read that statement here in 4121, the board will ensure that all employees and contractors whose work duties involve routine interaction with a child or have responsibility for their care. So I would say, based on that language, going back to your previous question, if you employ a community member as a coach, then they should be enrolled in the state RAPAC system. But that might be a good question for your attorney.
You think contractor in here, don't think about like construction worker contractor, think about mental health provider, directions for you.
There is one, I thought there was one option in here. Employees and contractors need to complete a new BCI background check. Here. Yeah, do we do it at their expense on initial enrollment, or do we cover that?
For this for classified, we can cover it for classified.
Because that was going to do the contract. Negotiated.
I'm pretty sure if classified, we cover it for certified.
Okay, so then we'll need to modify this language to align with those contracts.
Yeah, I mean, I think Nikki, it would make sense to just strike that line.
And then we're just following the
we're just
contract.
following the negotiated agreements with what we negotiated with our employees.
And that way, if the negotiated agreements change, we don't have to go back and modify the policy. I support that. You too, Kelly? Okay, no, that makes sense. That brings us to policy 5131, student transfers. We've got some general neutral language here, which is great. And then there's a lot that relates to your.
So all changed here that just gives more authority for students to transfer based on these conditions. I believe it's code.
Meaning that students, yeah.
It doesn't take any authority away from the superintendent. It grants a little more leeway for us to make individual student decisions.
Okay.
With definite spectrum.
Okay.
That emanated from House Bill 147.
All right. This brings us to 5136, personal communication devices.
So this was in response to House Bill 250, which allows districts to restrict cell phone use. It also requires disciplinary measures and certain exclusions. For example, a student is using a cell phone to monitor glucose levels or something like that.
So I think this, we would be calling this the cell phone policy versus the PCD policy. So I would table this for now.
I support that.
We've said we would take our time on that.
Yeah.
Yep.
We have till July.
Yep. And we're reserving after the end of this. Okay. Policy 513601, electronic equipment is something we do not currently have. Does it say when this was first written? Let's see, Neola. 17, where boombox is really still around in
Come
17.
back into style.
It's true.
I have multiple record players in my house.
Yes, and like, 10 years ago, you would be like, why does the record player need to be?
Taylor Swift these days,
Yeah.
on opening day.
That's very true.
I know.
Trent, do you feel like this is a policy that we don't formally have because it's handled in, administrative guidelines, or do you know the history regarding, the lack of inclusion?
Very specific.
Yeah, like I do think, I think it's administrative guidelines or handbooks would determine,
Right, this is
like our
typically
policy is
covered by
pretty open,
handbooks.
our policy is pretty open from a board standpoint to allow our administration to work through whatever devices.
Yeah.
Those come and go, change, and then all, Kelly girl.
Do we feel like we're appropriately covered under, because, excuse me, the section that was added was school issued devices and accounts. Do we want Jeff to take a look at?
Yeah, I do think this is the Senate Bill 29 stuff. Jeff, you want to
It
come
is.
up?
Yeah, this is Senate Bill 29, which limits the school monitoring of student devices and accounts. It also places requirements on third-party vendor contracts to provide additional information.
And
So,
Jeff, I mean, Jeff Patterson, when I look at this, and I think from my reading, we don't really have any authority to make a change here, correct?
no,
This is language that needs to be adopted is essentially where we are. Okay. And Jeff Paula, do you feel like our practices are in line with what's highlighted in green there?
Yes, we're working to get them there. I think we have a tipping point of a communication this Sunday evening
Okay,
that I think gets us all the way there.
okay. I want us to obviously be there before we adopt. So, okay.
Yeah, we were very conscious of making sure that we had processes in place for staff to reconcile things before we really took any actions. Just because the way the law is written, we're operating in the exception realm.
Right.
Jeff, would you talk a little bit, because I have not done a good job of sharing with the board Senate Bill 29, and it's a massive conversation in Ohio public education. Could you just give a Cliff Notes version of what are the tension points?
Yes, the big changes that we saw from the legislation was really redefining what the third-party relationship is. The Cliff Notes version, we described it to staff in our last newsletter, is basically anyone not a Worthington Schools employee operating in an official Worthington Schools employee capacity. They're really a third party. That covers hardware, software, apps, extensions, everything. Basically what it is we need to make sure that we have enough checks and balances in place if we're sharing student data with them, that they acknowledge we own the data. There's no ambiguity around that. If we terminate the contract, we either get the data back or it gets destroyed. We also have to ensure that only the people that need to see our student data have access to see it, similar to what kind of FERPA is in our realm. So those are the big things around the third party relationship. The other portion in that space is they redefined some of what a student record is. The big addition they added was browser history. So like where a student where they go online on one of our devices or on our network is a educational record.
Interesting.
So this next portion of that is whenever we access those records, we have due diligence to notify the family to do so. So that's kind of the significance of when you put it all together. It changes the dynamics.
Before you move on from that, okay, so everything that you stated there as far as the fact that we own the data, the fact that should the contract terminate, obviously all rights go back to us, that they have appropriate restrictions in place to ensure that data isn't shared with third parties, outside of their control. Those to me are all contractual provisions. So have we had our outside counsel give us either review those contracts to ensure that they meet those or the giving us like, best practice for what we would look for within those contracts, so
Yeah,
from a
like-
provisional standpoint.
Yes, the economies of scale of this are tough, trying to negotiate with all of these third parties, because, you know, it's in the hundreds. What we've done is we joined in an organization that the OD actually pays for a membership for, where we essentially crowdsource getting an Ohio student data privacy agreement signed, and there's an exhibit E in it. And that's part of our negotiations with these companies of negotiate with us or cover for the state.
Well, yeah, and that's where you get the leverage to get the change versus each individual district negotiating that change.
So yeah, I would say of all the Ohio SDPAs we have signed, we probably only negotiated, you know, of the 80 or 50, whatever we have, we probably only negotiated 10%. We just joined others. Now, we do have scenarios where folks refuse to sign them, or they don't even engage. Like it's tough to get Google or an Adobe to sign something like that. So in that scenario, we go through their policy, and a lot of times we'll sit down with our team and say, yeah, we're good. And we kind of document that differently in our world. But there's a new resource that we're going to make available in the tech update, hopefully coming out Sunday evening. It shows a list of kind of everything that's acceptable for staff to continue to use, so.
So Jeff's doing a great job, but I think.
And.
Yeah. Not about Jeff. But
No, that's like, and, that's why it's an
from
and.
a legal perspective, I think this makes sense. Like when Jeff explains it, certainly from your standpoint, thinking about the legal backing and data, all that. From a teacher standpoint, our teachers are really struggling. So for instance, Quizlet may be something you could no longer use. And a lot of our teachers would use that. And what happens in this wild west of the tech world is teachers find something, they see it's good, it might have been presented to them at a tech conference they went to or something else, and they want to start using it. We're really saying, you have to stop, press pause, got to go through a review process. You can't use an app, a system you saw. Like, you know, and there may be some things that you've been using and you really like. Maybe it's Class Dojo at the elementary and they're not engaging and we can't get it done. We have to stop using Class Dojo. And teachers just really struggle with that, just as a profession, as a, like, so.
I think that's happening all over. You know, it's happening where I am. You know, can't just bringing me to go through our information technology department to make sure that whatever you're plugging in, adding to, all of those things. I don't necessarily know the school, the district specific, but.
I don't think it is just, I think it's the right word. I would just say teachers don't often recognize that. They recognize being in a classroom with kids and I want to use what I want to use. And so it's like, you Google what Columbus's union put out to their teachers, it caused a whole firestorm. And we're trying to be diligent and help them work through it. But it's just gonna be hard, like it'd be harder than, like, I don't know how to express to people that aren't in the building every day, how hard some of our teachers, how much they'll struggle with this.
Okay.
Even though we think it's the right work and we're trying to do it slowly.
And I say this, and I'm gonna make a caveat beforehand, because I have 100% faith in the district's ability to convey it in the appropriate manner. And I think part of that, it's a cultural change, and it is a emphasis on complying with the law so that it's not viewed as a district specific tying our hands. This isn't a WEC decision. This is a complying with the law in order to ensure that student data is not inappropriately shared. And then hopefully that reframes it in a manner of the WEC isn't tying my hands and being overly restricted in what I can and can't use. The WEC is merely ensuring that we as a school district are complying with what's mandated by the law.
Yeah, I thank you. And I think Jeff's working hard on it. I think our principals are, like Rob and Emily, have been involved, like, you know, constantly just trying to have conversation. Some unions in Ohio put out like sky is falling stuff to their members
Mm.
and don't use technology type stuff because you're gonna lose your license and, like, and then that creates panic because that gets shared from one teacher union to another teacher union. It's just a massive shift. It's not the wrong shift at all. It's just, there's always something new in technology. I mean, I asked Jeff to open something for me yesterday. He said, can you open this Google thing for me? Like, and there's always something out there. And now we're just like, we're trying to put a process in place that's press pause, take it to technology. Some things are probably not going to get to keep being used. We'll survive. We'll move on to something different that does have an agreement. So like, I think there's just that transition period, but we haven't shared much with the board because I feel like we're working through it, but you may hear about it at some point, not just from Worthington people, just in the industry, because this is.
And that's where, like, you have the opportunity to frame it as, you appreciate the fact that they need technology in the classroom. And so you're working to clear and provide those tools that they can use and the trust that they, the sky isn't falling. We don't want to take everything away and to trust, what comes out of the WEC as, we're gonna ensure that you don't lose your license, right? We want you in the classroom, which is why you're creating this list of approved, right? So that hopefully they can breathe more deeply about and be comfortable and secure in what they do use.
Yeah, the process that we plan to release is, but when someone puts a request in, we don't even see it until it goes through AAPL. Like, there's a couple back and forth. It's not just kind of tech in isolation, just because the legalities are really, they're an important new part, it feels like, but it's a pretty small part. Like, it's before we even determine, hey, how do we deploy this? How do we run it? Like, is this even good? Is this in line with where we want to be instructionally? So, Google started kind of reeling us in last October, and Dr. Powers and I had good conversations of, people need it, let's give them some grace. And so we actually started this process to develop the review about 10 months ago.
That's great.
So I think we were pretty lucky that we kind of had it almost ready. We heard about SB 29. So we kind of paused and said, let's see what this looks like. And if we had to start the conversation about how do we do this now, it would be really challenging. So we were fortunate on our timing.
That's excellent.
I will just a whole question. But not related to what you just said. I thank you for your, I know you're working really hard on it. So we said to revisit 5136, and this is 5136.01. Again, the numbering. Do we wait and revisit this once that you have a little bit further understanding is tied to some legislation change? And so what's the timeline for that?
The law took effect October 20th. So the law is associated.
And we're following the law.
Implement.
And this was pretty generalized, saying we're going to do what the law says.
Mhm.
So I feel pretty safe moving forward with this.
We can move forward with 51.36.01.
The one, knowing we're gonna get the, yes. Okay, good. Thank you, good conversation.
So are we adding?
Nikki and Trent, just an FYI, there is a legal alert in this package that you can share with the board on Senate Bill 29. It captures what Jeff was talking about.
Thank you, John.
That is one of the things I will say too, in my circles, I've been told that the legislature understands there are some impossibilities to compliance with this law. They intend to fix those this fall.
I think most of the fixes though are just gonna be around the 72-hour notification. And so, it's like, if a school district had to notify every time an educational record is accessed, if you define browser history,
Oh,
like
gosh.
that, like with teachers monitoring Google devices and different things in the classroom, that could be hundreds of notifications. So
On the daily.
Yeah, what we want to do is they just need to redefine what educational record is. There are times where absolutely we need to notify a parent. The way it's technically written provides this mass notification. And they've said they'll fix that probably in like back here. But I'm not sure how much else they'll change.
Yeah, when I debated with our council, kind of what this looks like, the legal term they threw out that was new to me was malicious compliance. If you actually notify them every time, it'd be 10 to 20 emails a day.
My other just clarification question is, are we just adopting the green portion of this?
That's what I thought.
Yes.
Yes.
Good question.
Yeah.
Since we don't have the policy.
Right.
Make a note really fast.
You're good. Take your time.
Okay, thank you.
Right, that brings us to 5,200 attendance. Most of the changes, I think, relate to the religious expression days. And the gender neutral language.
House Bill 214 requires schools to allow 3 religious expression days, so this is included in this policy.
There are some options, third paragraph in specifically related, well, actually, just another one. Sorry. At the top of page 3, there's some language that we don't currently have under excessive absences. That's unrelated to religious expression days and instead related to medical reasons.
You said the top of page 3, is that what you're referring to?
Correct.
The second paragraph?
Correct. Any thoughts on this one, Trent?
No, I mean. We technically always follow that 10-day rule where you can always just call somebody sick after 10 days and we may ask you for a doctor's note after that.
This is my question, historically, with having been on the policy committee. How specific, to me, some things need to be clear. And then some things don't need to be as specific because they're dealt with by administrative guidelines and or handbooks, which is.
I feel like most of the time when you and I have sat on this together, what we've tried to do is put our parent hat on and think about it from the standpoint of if you're trying to find an answer, would you be looking for an answer to X, Y, Z within our policy?
You know, on this one though, I would say like the lens I'd want you to look at is we're struggling to get a student and a family to come to school.
Oh yeah, I don't want them to know they can have
And-
10 days.
Well, 10's pretty standard. It's
Okay.
after that when you start saying, I need a doctor's note. And it's not, it shouldn't be done in situations where we know why a student really is gone because they really have an issue.
Right.
But it might be helpful when we're really struggling to get a student or a family to
Come to school.
regular school attendance. We'll say.
Yeah, I hear you. Like, it's
So-
like, of course we give it, but what I hear you saying is we don't need to advertise that you have this.
Yeah, I think I'm trying to flip it and maybe Jeff could help. The question is if a principal said, hey, we need a doctor's excuse, and family said, I don't need to provide one. Would this policy help that? Because after 10 days, they can require it. Now, the truth is probably we can't do anything. They say.
I'm not gonna provide it.
Like, we can mark it unexcused, but. So, I don't know.
I don't
I don't
feel
have any
strongly
strong
about it.
feelings.
I don't feel strongly about it either.
You don't feel strongly about having it in there or not having it in there.
Either way.
Yeah,
honestly.
I don't know.
Where are we leaning?
Do you want to be the deciding factor? We can take it to the board and say we didn't finish them. Maybe there's not a whole lot. We usually align, Kelly, on. And so we could have a discussion as to whether or not anyone feels like it's.
So here's where my thought process is, and I don't mean to drag this out. My thought process is you need to have some kind of parameter guideline. And also I think about pushing families to tell us medical information, or give us medical information. I guess the doctors know could just say. this
Oh, it's
person's
just excused. No, it doesn't have
Without
to.
information.
Yes,
So
100%.
it's gonna, and as I talk that through.
Meaning that you're okay with having it because it doesn't require a specific disclosure of someone's medical condition. I don't have a problem with including it. And it does support your position, Trent, in that it would provide something that the principal is going to do to the extent that they end up.
Yeah, I
using
mean,
it.
I will say, 30 years ago, whether an absence was excused or unexcused was a really big deal, because unexcused absences, we weren't gonna let you make up your work, and that had massive consequences. As we've looked at grading differently over the last 15 years, there's not a big, not a major issue for anybody, but also sometimes that makes it hard to work with families to get them to actually get kids to come to school, because we're doing everything we can to help the child, which we're not gonna stop doing.
Right.
But, so, the absence thing is, but we want to support regular school attendance. And so,
Do we want to include the sentence in here regarding a pandemic or an epidemic?
we're gonna do it. If there was such a thing, we're gonna excuse it.
Yeah. I honestly just didn't recall if it was already addressed in another, because we did adopt policies specific to pandemics afterwards, and I don't recall if it included it, but we can just include it and then we can cross-check. I'm glad to do that to make sure that it aligns with the other language we have related to pandemics.
So are we checking 10 days for first two options, and then there's an option in the second line up in the paragraph?
You're saying 10 days, 10 days.
Then there's another option below that.
Medical excuse for personal illness will be accepted in the form of a doctor's notice within 5 full days of the absence or parent call in on the day of the absence. Illness doctors.
The 5 part seems to. Am I reading that right? Am I too tired because it's Friday? You can have up to 10 days, but then the medical excuse be accepted within 5 days of the school days. Oh, no, never mind. Because I'm not reading it properly.
You're good.
I think 5 days.
Okay. All right, and then obviously House Bill 214 requires the religious expression days, and then there's a section in the 3rd paragraph related to options, mostly related to, I feel like it should just be Superintendent Trent, because we already have within the policy that things that are noted as you can be delegated appropriately. Is that good? Okay. Yeah, I was just looking there too. Yeah, I think I don't know what else we would put there, but it's just as published by the state superintendent. Yeah.
We have
do have
a
a
list. I've
list.
never seen one from the state before, so that must be coming out, but we do have a list.
Yeah, we drafted that list in connection with the other policy. Yeah.
So we're checking that option.
Question, Tracy, I'm sorry.
She asked if we're checking that.
Yeah, well, yeah, for sure, let's check that, because like we could do more than that, but we won't do under.
Under, right, okay, okay. So your highlighted yellows are the ones we currently have selected, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
My one question about absent attendance is, did Kelly at all look at this policy to make sure that what she's doing, with her work with absences relates?
She didn't look at the policy, but it should relate because what she's doing with attendance is tied into the state man, like. attendance.
Then I am comfortable with the rest, you as well? Yeah, okay. All right, that brings us to policy 5500, student conduct.
It was revised to include provisions addressing academic honesty and optional provisions for artificial intelligence.
Angie looked at the AI language.
Yes, yes, we spent a lot of time with the AI language, and we actually took the AI language and we put it into AI. And so
Okay.
it summarized it and said the Neola draft policy on AI tools permits staff to use them responsibly to fulfill their job. So that's good, provided they respect privacy and confidentiality. For students, the AI tool use is largely restricted to preserve academic integrity and skill development. Students are prohibited from using AI for assignments unless they obtain prior teacher approval, in which case it can support specific tasks like research such and such. Teachers have discretion over AI used for educational purposes and may require students to cite AI generated content. So we've spent a lot of time on this. Angie's got a couple page document that we're working on with administrative guidelines. I would probably still table this for now. Just because I think it's close, but there's a few, like, I think we really need to talk about, does a student have to get prior written approval type thing? Like, you know, I think to me, it's really going to be on our teachers to share with assignments, like how a student needs to do an assignment. So I don't think we're there on the AI policy as of yet. But it was a good jumping off point as far as like, you know, Emily and Rob are all in this document trying to work through. So, but I think tabling that makes sense. And I don't think we need academic honesty out of it right now. Yeah, those all feel like things that are
Woven together.
well woven together, and also like, I don't know, kind of comments.
Yeah.
Academic honesty is not like a new topic to me.
No, I honestly, I was like, really? There's nothing in.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's, I mean,
Not a new topic.
I'm sure it's added because of AI.
AI,
Right,
right.
and what's the use, how should we be using AI in a classroom? But,
Would that be in a handbook? Like, I mean.
yeah, it would be a
Yeah.
handbook.
Mhm.
Plagiarism would be the big one, you know,
Stealing another.
copy another person's work. It doesn't feel like that's something we, in our board policy.
Yeah.
Building on that too, connecting it to Senate Bill 29, Angie and I are working with a handful of vendors to make sure we can get through all the agreements, things like that. And then I think our goal is to say, these are some resources to provide for the district.
AI resources.
Yeah, and
Okay.
I think that'll help quite a bit in terms of kind of understanding and guiding students and teachers to appropriate practices.
Yeah, because we're getting bombarded with AI resources in space. Then it's hard to kind of figure. So once we're able to define that a little bit, it'll make it a lot easier to figure out how do we guide students in what to use.
We think it'll be fairly fluid. Like,
Yeah, of
hey,
course.
we're gonna pick a resource, it's gonna be the best, and then within a year or two, there's gonna be something better, so. We'll have the process pretty quickly, just get to the best resource possible.
my mind immediately goes to closed or open environment. I don't necessarily see a need for a closed environment unless we're talking about teacher usage. And then it's really just a matter of being cognizant of what you put in and that you're not putting in any proprietary or confidential information. No, exactly. Yeah. Okay. Okay. So we're aligned. Okay. Good. Okay. Good. This brings us to policy 5780, student/parent rights.
This goes back to Senate Bill 29 again, which requires districts to share tech provider contracts when requested. So in discussions with other districts, what I'm finding is it may be easier to post contracts to a website rather than producing contracts individually. Just a thought.
So 29 requires the parental right to review those contracts. Okay.
Correct.
And wouldn't be
We have an
necessary.
annual disclosure. The law states now by August 1st, we plan to run that through kind of the annual update. This is similar to what we do for like photo release, directory information, things like that. We've been back and forth. We just saw, Olin TNG just released a similar resource that we've been working on this morning. So we're back and forth, and we are a little ways out, but we may just proactively make that available. We're in those discussions of if it is under the public records process, but a new law kind of puts us in that realm. Why wouldn't we just proactively make that available and save a lot of email responses? So
The only reason I would imagine is if it reveals, like if it puts you in a standpoint where you don't have a competitive advantage. So whether that's negotiating with a competitor of one of those services, like that's the only thing I want us to be thoughtful about is contract negotiations going forward. So that's just
yeah, I've only had one negotiation where they were big on, they get a redaction right before anything, and we're like, well, it's a public contract. There was any contention around that piece. Guess I never thought of the competitive advantage aspect. It probably just reduces spam emails, the cold calls for us. So
it's out there.
yes.
Okay. Kelly, I just noted, I'll copy you and send to the rest of the board well in advance of the meeting, the update overview comments so that everyone has that section as the whole thing, but including Senate Bill 29. All right, so nothing on that one then, or no? We're comfortable with the recommended changes. Okay. Brings us to policy 6220, budget preparations.
6220, I would leave our policy as is. So like, we do have that second set of grid in there. Like, you scroll down to the bottom where our policy is.
Thank you.
Yellow, I would maintain our policy, only because our policy, I mean, there's nothing wrong with the old policy, but our policy goes into specifics about our self-insurance fund. It maintains our general fund reserve at 60-day logo stuff. So I don't see need to accept anything.
Okay. Thank you. Any questions, Kelly? Brings us to 6320, purchasing and bidding.
This one, the state of Ohio increased the construction threshold when you build or enlarge a school building to 75,000. So I would recommend accepting that. That's on the second page of green. What I would say too, though, is on the first page, so there's items that have to be bid under law when you construct or enlarge or repair a building, but then there's everything else, supplies and things that you don't have to bid out. So currently, both those levels are 50,000. So the first paragraph says we get at least 2 quotes of 50,000. We have to bid construction at 50,000. The state's raising this bidding of construction 75. My recommendation would be to raise the quote
Part to 75.
That makes sense.
They'll have to do that, but that's just my recommendation. Keep in mind, theory is as inflation goes, you don't want to have to get multiple quotes on everything. 75,000 seems to be a reasonable level. So I would mirror those two. So that's the only thing, Tracy, it's not in green from the all in that first
First paragraph.
area. I would think that's 75 as well.
That makes sense to me.
And under the limitations section on the first paragraph, that's pink. We struck that out. I would put that back in. So basically it says all purchases that are within the amount contained, then I would choose object of the original appropriations may be made upon authorization of the treasurer. So if you recall last year under our standing resolutions at our organizational meeting, it says that we're allowed, what it's basically saying is if you, once we set the budget, we're allowed to make purchases within the budget.
Okay.
Otherwise, all those purchases have to come to the board.
Okay.
So we chose to do a standing resolution at our organizational meeting. I feel like if we put this back in, then we don't have to do that resolution every year. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
So Tracy, I would do it as object. Object means salaries, benefits. So when you see those transfers for me, those are our objects.
Okay.
So I would say all purchasers that were contained in the object line item of the appropriation. Check that second clause. Originally contemplated may be made upon authorization of the treasurer. Period.
Yeah, that was just language that Neil was struck.
I don't,
I know you didn't check some of the other additional.
I didn't, I mean, I don't know if we really.
No, I mean, I think if it aligns with our standard resolution, or standing resolution, that's good.
Right. That's it.
Thank you. Brings us to 6460 vendor relations.
Yeah, so this one, I would say, maybe Jeff, you can, on the last, green in the last paragraph of the first page, all salespersons, regardless of the product, you guys are changing clear to make contact with the superintendent's office before contacting teachers. I would be opposed to that because I feel like make contact is I send Trent an email and I show up at the school door, try to sell something. I would think clear means you gotta get approval first.
I 100%
I
agree.
use a different word than clear. Approval.
Yeah, approval, or I don't know why we originally chose clear, but
I think
So get approval with the superintendent.
Yeah, secure approval.
I don't think.
Tracy, can you show me where that's at?
Yeah.
Okay. And so the suggestion is to change that
To secure approval.
secure approval? Works for me.
And then second page, Jeff, on the requirements for certain technology provider contracts.
Sorry, I didn't have this one prior.
I was curious, Jeff, I think it's what you're talking about, that we have to get a contract with them. Yeah.
Education records, yeah, it's similar language.
It's similar to compliance with.
That's the law.
So this is again Senate Bill 29.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think
We have to accept it. It's essentially Senate Bill 29, indicating that we're complying with. Right, that brings us to 753001, board-owned technology resources used for communication. We do not have this policy.
So Neola has two versions of this policy. One is for those districts who require employees to use personal cell phones. And the second one are board-owned tech resources. You don't have either of these in your policy, but you do have AG 5136.
Jeff, is there any reason you would recommend we have a policy regarding this?
Well, let me ask the question, which does the board provide cell phones for administrators?
Not for administrators, we provide them for a handful of maintenance folks, classified hourly staff.
I ran into a district last week that they actually adopted both of these policies because they wanted to cover the ones that are owned by the board, and they wanted to have a policy regarding the personal use of their cell phones.
So I'm going to make a recommendation that we table this, and then we get a recommendation as to just put some thought behind whether we're protected or not without this policy for those that are district owned. And then whether or not we need a policy related to conducting district business on personal devices.
I would agree, like I would shy away from a policy on stuff. I'd like our staff acceptable to use this policy that we talk about actions and behaviors. So the ownership of the platforms is somewhat agnostic, so.
So you're more comfortable with our approach regarding actions versus the device specific? Would you just do us a favor and revisit the actions and behaviors and as compared to what's recommended here to make sure that there's nothing that we're missing?
Yeah.
Okay, does that sound reasonable, Kelly? Okay. And then 7530 is tabled, as we discussed. We're actively working on what that policy will look like in the district, correct? The cell phone policy?
This is 7530.01.
Yes.
Yeah, so we don't have it. No one gets it, so.
Oh, this is just if it's provided, sorry.
So likewise, Nikki, 0.02, 0.03, and 0.04, you currently do not have those policies.
Okay. And these are all, so I would include these in the review, Jeff, if you would, because these are all behavior-based. And so what does ours say in comparison to these? And are there any gaps in ours that we would want to fill? And I guess maybe like, I don't know, I'll do the same, and maybe you can do the same too. We can just review these, but let us know, like, next time we come together, we can include communication devices on our list. I don't recall why we adopted our own policy versus adopting Neola's, and so that comparison will be a good one a good practice. Okay, thank you. Policy 754009, I assume we're tabling at this point merely because we are working through our policy on artificial intelligence. Does that make sense, Dr. Bowers?
Right, Ms. Johnson, yes.
Take your time. Yeah, we
Yeah.
skipped 3. Okay. Anticipation, just so that we can let our, like, we can share when we do updates and of things that will be on the horizon. Cell phone will be on the horizon. Artificial intelligence, will include those two just as a caveat to the rest of the board.
Yeah, and I will say again, I might use with Justin, like the Senate Bill 29 thing has, I don't want to say slowed down, but combined with the artificial intelligence work to kind of become like Angie was on a track with artificial intelligence, then Senate Bill 29, Jeff was on that track. These things are now combining. They slow down some things, not in a bad way, but just trying to make sure that we're aligned, doing the right, so.
No, that makes sense.
There's some, couple of sessions I went to at OSBA about building a policy around AI, which could have shifted because this was in the spring and that's how fast things go. But, I'll look back at those notes and send them to you as well. I saw it was a good like pathway of like understanding how you want to conduct yourself as a district first. Similar to what you're saying about behaviors as opposed to the specific AI tool. And then how you navigate through that. So I found it helpful.
Do you mind sharing that with me as well?
Oh,
Thank you.
yeah, that's what I meant.
Okay.
It'll be interesting too, because I think eventually we're gonna need some pretty broad AI policy and then some much more specific administrative guidelines, because what Angie and team have is there are guidelines for students and staff on AI tools for staff specific, students specifically. Like, so like we'll need some sort of broad policy and then, but we'll get there. So we're not there yet.
Yeah, I mean, the reality is it's part of most work, yeah. And so tying our students' hands completely is not helpful, but helping them conduct themselves, yeah. Good. In a responsible manner. All right, that brings us to 8310 public records. Looks like we have gender neutral language and some minor modifications. Thank you for noting what we currently in the policy by yellow, and then
So the Ohio Revised Code added educational support services data to the exclusion list.
I see that. Thank you.
Mhm.
Can you give an example of that?
There are certain service information that districts are required to send to Columbus regarding special education. That would be included in the exclusion list.
Follow up with Ken. Fully understand.
Yeah, I mean, obviously we'd like it in the policy and then we'll figure out. what the actual
100%.
is.
Yeah. Okay.
So-
I can just tell by the look on your face, that's a follow up. Like she
Well,
probably
we're just
knows
not
exactly.
sure,
Yeah. Like what is it?
What was defined, like, but probably something that hasn't been requested of us yet.
Right.
Like,
I feel like we would have redacted that anyways, though, because if it has any PII for students, we're releasing it, so.
Makes sense.
we'll figure out what that term means, because obviously it's new.
Okay. And then finally, 9160 public attendance at school events. This is related to admission costs.
It further states in there that you cannot charge students more than you would charge adults.
This is the legal, and that's the law that was passed. Um, You had to create a student price.
We do. No issues with compliance then. Yeah, thank you, as always.
Are you going to address the uniform grant guidance regulations?
Did I miss one?
Those are all
That's the,
financial ones.
You have to click out of this packet and go to a different.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
The fun continues.
Yeah.
It's what we were originally just gonna take things.
Yeah. Okay, oh, that's right there.
yes,
Okay,
exactly.
thank you.
You currently have a conflict of interest policy for administrators and for support staff, but you do not have one for teaching staff.
Looking at that, Jeff, and I don't know the reason behind that, but the 1130 seems to me like it covers everyone, because it says employee, officer, agent, or board. So what is the real point of having multiple conflict of interest policies if the first one covers them all?
I used to ask that question when I was a school superintendent, but now that I'm work with Neola, it's all about ease of location for your employees. So if I'm an administrator, I go to the 1000s. If I'm a teacher, I go to the 3000s, et cetera.
But I would argue if I'm looking for conflict of interest, I search conflict of interest and.
I didn't know if it was because of anything with collective bargaining or not in your district, so. I just wanted to point out that you didn't have it, so.
I mean,
I'm okay with all the changes in 1130. There's wording changes. Need to add the classified and certified.
the 3113 and the 4113, yeah. I'm okay with maintaining 1130 alone. As it covers all individuals.
Yeah. I am listening to Jeff's point of like, you know, there are other policies that we have, so I can understand why it was broken down in that way, but if this one policy, because usually those,
Are specific.
yes,
Yeah.
they're specific to each level
Mhm,
in each policy,
mhm.
right? And
Right.
so if this one covers all of those, then I don't necessarily think that we need to divide that out.
Well, especially in this, I mean, oftentimes there are different rules for different subsets and license or not license. In this particular case, conflict of interest has to disclose for it.
But interestingly, we have it in 4130 already. That's what, or 4113. It's just the 3113 that we don't have.
Yeah.
So I think we should be consistent. We should have one or we should have three. So.
We can have three and accept all the changes. That's probably the easiest.
So that is probably the easiest at this point, given that we already have 4113. Okay.
You would want to make sure, Tracy, though, like the one option we put in there is $25. So then all of that.
Consistent, yeah. I think it's under section C in each of them. Yeah, it is.
TJ, does that $25, like, is that subject to inflation?
Well, the ethics commission will tell you there is no dollar amount, but they won't find it. But it should be. I don't should make that call. You want to do
All right, that brings us to 6110 grant funds.
Yes.
So the rest of these Edgar or Uniform Grant Guidance policies, you've stayed on top of the last few years. So recently, effective July 1, the new federal regulations went into effect. So any federal grants issued after July 1, you're required to have this language in each of these policies. If you are still closing out previous federal grants, you can follow the old requirements.
So this is what I would recommend, Tracy. So our policy is in yellow. It's very short. I would recommend accepting their policy as is, except I don't think we need a section on internal review. Like, so just so we understand, we apply for grants as they become available. I don't know that we need to dictate that process, dictate the review process, and how it been. Multi-board. Like I think we accept all of the OLAs except for the grant proposal development and the grant proposal internal review section. So that I think that's just that, to me that's more metric guideline type stuff than it is.
And TJ, then is that in replace of our current policy?
I think so, right?
Yeah. I assume
Jeff?
as much as well.
I would agree, yes.
My only thoughts here though is I wrote down checkbox F. I think that's under grant administration.
Yes,
Superintendent is authorized to sign, but we don't want to bring those to the board for
that makes sense.
approval. The rest of them, they don't have to check, but.
TJ, there's also some administrative guidelines that are connected to those policies that were revised. And my understanding is there will be more revised in February.
Point of clarification, Jeff, do you know if the federal E-rate program is considered a grant under this lens?
I would believe it would be. That would be my impression.
Just didn't know if it was a reimbursement or like considered more of a subsidy. Just because of the percentage they use. Okay.
Are we in a good place then, 6110? Internal control, 6111.
Yeah, I would accept all those. Good for the change. Does.
I was just gonna call that out, yeah. Which we do anyway, but it puts it directly in policy for PII.
Do they specifically define a standard?
That's what.
Not yet.
That's what all the other states trying to do that.
Yeah.
That's trying to fix this.
Just fine.
Any questions or comments? Okay, thank you. 6112 cash management and grants. C-114 cost principles spending federal funds.
This is where I would accept the $10,000 change. And this is, if you go down to third page, select item of cost, they're increasing the threshold at which we consider reportable capital expenditures from 5,000 to 10,000. That means the things that we show on our external financial statements, inflationary adjustment. So I accept that change, and you'll see later on 7450 mirroring that change to 10,000. That's really just an accounting issue. The rest is
And then 6325 procurement of federal grants and funds.
we want to select continuously, and again, Where, okay, so on page 2, in yellow where it says periodically, so we don't use, what this is saying is how often we let vendors onto our pre-qualified list. We don't use a pre-qualified list. So now that they're giving us a mandate that we do, I would say we select continuously instead of periodically. Because if somebody calls us up, we're gonna let them on the list. Like, if we want to buy goods from them, we don't maintain the list. And I feel like it says periodically, that puts the onus on us to open something up.
Yeah, whereas continuously is just as you guys deem fit.
So is that a change of, I don't see a check.
It's not, it's in yellow.
Okay, so right now we're saying periodically,
And we'll
and
change
we
that.
change it to continuously.
Because I feel like before, yeah, I just think it does say to the extent the district uses a pre-qualified list of persons, so I guess it doesn't matter if we don't use one. But I would make it continuously just.
Make it clean with what our practices would be to the extent that we start to use them. Okay. And 6550 travel payment and reimbursement relocation costs.
So I would select in accordance. Payment, so second paragraph, payment and reimbursement rates for per diem meals, lodging, board shall reimburse mileage in accordance. Or I guess we could lose it at the federal, we chose at. That wasn't an option. I don't know if that's proper language.
I mean, they say the same thing, right? In
I-
accordance with the federal IRS prescribed mileage rate or at, in accordance, actually, I think is a little clearer. So,
They just
comfortable with
changed
that.
it.
They're moving that right there.
No,
We can leave it. To me, it means the same thing. as
it
in
means the
accordance
same
with-
thing. So we have that right now, and I guess we'll just leave that.
Don't select either one of them.
Correct.
So this is what's interesting. Under temporary dependent care costs, where it says we have to choose an option. Right now, we don't have that option checked, and we don't reimburse for dependent care costs. What I would tell you is this applies to federal law, but what it says in that drafting note is if we change some, if we choose to be allowed to reimburse for that against a federal grant, we have to do that against all our district policies. So that's why I don't recommend doing that. And that's for, yeah, I mean, we can have that discussion. We typically don't use a lot of federal funds for travel, to be honest with you. But I think it's not even a point really, but. So we're not checking any of those boxes because we're not checking the main ones.
No concerns with that approach. 7310, disposition of surplus property.
So that's where I would choose that to 10,000. So in green, per unit cost that equals or exceed 10,000. Because we established that an asset is something that is 10,000 and dispose of something that is 10,000.
That makes sense. That makes complete sense.
That's it with that policy. We'll accept the rest.
And then 7450 property inventory.
10,000, so that 5,000 trade
Becomes 10.
yellow and then becomes 10. Kind of heavy green down there.
Any other comments on that one?
Just I'll have to just forward it from the good.
Thank you. All right, well, I jumped ahead, but now I'm worried about it. Which I believe is approval of minutes. I'll motion to approve the minutes of our October 14th policy committee meeting, and you've already second, we're good. Do you please call for the vote?
Mrs. Hudson,
Yes.
Mrs. Davis.
Yes.
I thank everyone's assistance today and getting us through a large number of updates, and I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Second. Mrs. Hudson. Yes. Mrs. Davis.
Excellent, thank you,
I could
everyone.
see Potentially a first reading November 25th,
Okay,
reading and the December meeting.
I will not be at our December meeting, I just learned that today, but obviously I'll express my support.
I don't think there's anything in these policies. Yeah, this goes, that would be
Yeah,
particularly even conversation.
Okay.
So.
We have logistical questions, and not gonna be able to December meeting,
mhm.
so President Pro Tem. Or have to be there to accept that.
I think I can,
We stop recording or just it's conversation.
I think we still.
I think I can easily share that I can accept it. Yeah,
Just making sure.
yeah, I think that makes sense to call out though. Yeah. Mhm.